Yep, here.
Anderson. Sticky.
Here. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 1.2, have a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call.
Regano.
Yes.
Malone.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Sticky.
Yes.
Motion passes. Item 1.3, approval of the September 23rd, 2014 meeting minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Regano.
Yes.
Malone.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Sticky.
Yes.
Motion passes. Item, let's see, 2.1. Is there a report from the Springboro Education Association?
No, that would work.
No? Moving on to item 2.2, Springboro classified employees. Any such report? No? Item 2.3, I don't think there's anyone that's prearranged to speak. So 2.4, any other public participation? Item 3.1, we'll move to the treasurer's report. Approval, let me read this. Approval to transfer $150,000 from the General Fund 001 to Athletic Fund 300, 901B to subsidize the athletic program. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Just a question, this is installment one for this year?
Instead of doing the whole transfer at once, we'd like to see how much revenue they bring in. So we do the first one to get through the end of November.
Yeah, football game is going to bring some record crowds, so hopefully that continues. Winning football teams good for business.
Roll call?
Regano.
Yes.
Malone.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Sticky.
Yes.
Motion passes. Moving on to the superintendent's report.
This is approval of resolution to establish a nonprofit foundation called the Borough Family Fest Foundation, which plans to hold an annual community festival on district property.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Regano.
Yes.
Malone.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Sticky.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Moving on to, that's all in your report, right? You don't have anything else?
Is there more on me? Yeah, that's it on me. That's it.
Okay. Item 5.1, approval of special education team leaders supplemental.
Yes, those supplementals are for 5 Points, Dennis, Springboro Intermediate, Junior High at this time. Currently, we just have it at the high school. And given that we have the new laws for special ed that came out in July, we have new operating standards that have come out in September, which all of our paperwork, identification, reevaluation, all of those things have been changed. And we are looking to build team leaders in each of those buildings in order to facilitate and mentor our numerous new teachers who have just come out of college in the last year or two. We have about 45% of our special ed department being new, and so we are looking to use our teachers that have been here for a while as mentors for them, and to ensure that our standards, our IEPs, and all of the other paperwork is compliant.
And by the way, nice to have you back.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
Just a question here, Lee. The proposed salary for this position, is it comparable, I assume, to the department cheerleaders that exist right now?
That is correct. It goes on, however, they'll all be new, so therefore they will be on step one, but they will be on that supplemental schedule.
Roll call?
Regano,
Yes.
Malone,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Stuckey.
Yes. Motion passes. Item 5.2.
5.2, we have 4 different agenda items. We are requesting approval for the board to approve the student travel to these particular countries. Again, this is something that we instituted, I think, about 1.5 years ago, and that is these students travel during the summer, but our teacher, we may have a teacher that works with an outside company that we then have to approve to get the voucher, because if they get so many of our students, then they get a free trip. So that comes through the board as more of a gift. And so we are asking approval, if they do meet the numbers needed, the chaperone Liz Schneider, Ashley Vincent, Robert Oken, and Lindsay Sabb and Julie Crace for those student travel opportunities in the summer of 2016, it looks like. Well, one is 2015, and 3 of them are for the summer of 2016.
So can we approve 2, 3, 4, and 5?
Yes.
I think the superintendent might need to go to Switzerland, Italy, France, just to make sure everything's good. It's important, I'll oversee these things.
Roll call?
We'll get to
Or, I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, or any discussion?
Yeah, just, I guess a technicality. The motion, the way it's worded, says approval of student travel to England. And really, the board's not approving student travel, and we don't want the liability for the student travel either. And what we're really approving is for the teacher to be reimbursed by the travel company.
Correct.
Probably for the value of the trip.
Yep.
And so, if in the minutes we can make that reflect that we're approving the receipt of a voucher for teacher travel as opposed to the approval of the students traveling.
Right.
I think that's an important distinction we should
And
make.
we'll correct that in other ones that come on.
That's right.
Good point.
Thank you.
Okay.
Roll call?
Regano,
Yes.
Malone,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Stuckey.
Yes. Motion passes. Move on to 5.6.
5.6 is kind of retroactive. We are asking for the request of approval of additional work days. These come in late August, usually in preparation for the schools being opening or professional development. This is both for certified and classified personnel. And just a little background, we wait until the summer is over to have these approved because we can't estimate in advance what we exactly are going to know we need, or that, for example, like the co-teaching. Or summer clean in the kitchen. With a new person coming in, we couldn't anticipate that, so those things are retroactive. So we are looking at having approval for those days that were worked in mostly August. And I believe you have the number of days worked on the attachment, plus the name of each employee and the number of days worked per se.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Roll call?
Question.
Oh, sorry.
On the classified, their contracts are hourly,
Right.
typically, right? So if they're paid by hour as opposed to a stipulated number of contract days, I was just unclear as to why we would need to approve those.
Because they're beyond their contracted year, because they're only contracted for the school day's work. These are summer hours. And so some of these that are, and if you need more specifics, but for example, like Sarah Gershner, she would have been, it says 3 days work, that would have been for professional development. That would have been a teacher that came in for professional development. But let's look at, I believe there's a Petrie here. Let me see what that is.
Oh,
Charles
really?
Petrie, 1 day. That would have been hours worked on the bus for transportation. So it's not that it was 8 hours worked, but it was that within that day, 1 day, he worked so many hours for transportation. So if you need a breakdown of that, I'd be
Well,
happy to.
I'm not asking for a breakdown, I'm
Okay.
just trying to understand if Mr. Petrie,
His dad.
his dad,
We can just knock him.
if he's an hourly employee, I mean, he got paid and everything, I assume, because he put 8 hours on his timesheet and he got paid. But his contract isn't limited to a certain time of the school year, is it? I mean,
Yes.
is it- So it's from like August 15 to
Yeah,
June?
any summer type of, that's what they're looking for, is approval for all of the hours beyond the normal work contract, which is the 185 days.
Okay.
That's my Christmas gift.
We do have other bus drivers and kitchen people, if you'd like me to highlight those people.
Okay, roll call?
Regano,
Yes.
Malone,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Stuckey,
Yes.
Motion passes. So we're on to board comments?
No,
Wow.
5.7 first.
Oh, okay.
We have one more, and it's the personnel items for the month, or for the last 2 weeks. And we are looking at classified personnel, and those items are 1 through 28. And we also have some supplemental personnel items. And as you can see, those are both athletic and some team leaders and academic coaches and things like that. And then we do have our approval of parent volunteers for Camp Kern. And the reason we do that is that when the board approves them, that anything that may happen at Camp Kern, they've been approved, they've been fingerprinted, and they are ready to go. And so they fall under our insurance umbrella with your approval.
Okay. We have a motion,
So moved.
second.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call?
Regano,
Yes.
Malone,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Stuckey,
Yes.
Motion passes. Somehow that was omitted.
yeah, it wasn't removed.
So any other fives? All right, board member reports, comments, questions? Mr. Stuckey, any comments?
No?
Mr. Regano?
Couple. Probably deserve a little more discussion when we vote at the time of the vote on the Borough Family Fest resolution, but for those who may not be aware of what that is, the folks who have been running the Cook Family Fun Day are expanding and trying to make a bigger event. They are pointing towards the Altar Fest as an example of what they would like to do. Altar Fest has amusement rides, all kinds of activities. It's a major fundraiser for Altar to the tune of, I've heard the number, $400,000 thrown around. I don't know if they think they can get there in year one, but I know that they plan to continue on in the future and involve entities outside the school district to participate, to have athletic tournaments, possibly in conjunction with this, to bring people even from outside the community in to participate. And part of this is to emulate what they've done at Ultrafest, which is to have a beer and wine garden and also to have some gambling, which they see as the major source of fundraising. So we approved that earlier this evening. A couple meetings ago, we were talking about the number of students that were, the amount of money that we were paying for students who choose charter schools or some other form of education that the state requires us to fund. And I just came across this article today that I think is part of I don't think it's the whole reason that people might choose alternatives, but it's an example. And I read a story today where Columbus Day is being replaced with Indigenous Peoples Day in Seattle. And I just think people see that, and that this is approved by the Seattle School Board. There's a whole article out you can find it by searching the internet for Indigenous Peoples Day. But I think people just see the traditional America slipping away from them, and that there's really no pushback. And of course, the kids are in public school for a significant part of their day, and I just think that's a real growing concern. And Columbus Day, of course, is coming up this coming Monday. School in session, or is it a day off?
Oh, we're in session.
But I would, I don't know. How about that? I would just encourage people with Columbus Day in mind to go out to the Gilder Lehrman Institute and look at Columbus's letter to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel about his first voyage to the Americas. And of course, you can't read it in his writing because he wrote it in Spanish and it was translated to Latin and then, of course, translated again into English so that people like me can understand it. But it describes in great detail what he found when he got here. And it's quite interesting, and I just encourage people with Columbus Day coming up to go out there to the Gilder Lehrman Institute and look at that letter.
Where's that at, the institute you're referring to?
Well, it's gilderlehrman.com, I think, or .org.
Okay.
It's a website.
Huh.
And I guess I should have mentioned that. So all you got to do is go to your computer and type in Gilder Lehrman and search for Columbus, and you'll find the article. So just some things for Columbus Day. That's all I had, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Dr. Malone?
Nothing. Thanks.
I don't have anything. So any public announcements?
I do have one. We kicked off on Monday, Parents Who Host Lose the Most. And what we're trying to do is create an awareness of, we keep a close eye. Our police does a really nice job in terms of informing us what happens out in the community when there's parties, perhaps at someone's home. And with homecoming upon us this Saturday, we just wanted to draw awareness to our parents to really have a close eye on if they have kids to their home, the drinking and things of that nature. We don't want kids involved in that because clearly we all know that can lead to some tragic events. So our intent this week, and you'll see some of the signs, is just to create an awareness. There are some pamphlets, and I know as parents have read them, they've been quite shocked at the liability they hold if they do allow kids to do some of these things within their home. So we're just trying to create an awareness on that, and really the central focus is to keep our kids safe so that they're not forced into making decisions perhaps that they're not ready to make. And just wanted to share with that with you this evening.
Thank you. Future considerations? Any committee reports?
Well, we had budget and finance, and really went over the 5-year forecast that we're going to share with you this evening. We did get feedback from the team. I don't know anything else to add other than that. I mean, that's just what the meeting was about. I think one thing to keep in mind as we go over the 5-year forecast tonight, we're in October. There's a lot left to be, we're not positive on the pipeline funding yet. We're not 100% positive on the money we're going to get in from the state. So this one's very preliminary. I don't think anyone needs to jump to any conclusions. We need to look at it. We need to look at some of the expenses that we're going to have ahead of us. And at this point, we're getting to where we have to live within our means a little bit and really make sure that some of the things that we're adding we truly need, and perhaps what can we possibly live without a little bit. We're getting to that point in the 5-year forecast, which I think everyone expected at some point or another. So tonight, really, we will go over that. The one in May is going to be really, in my opinion, the big one. That's going to be the one where we really have to think about long-term future here in Springboro, and feel pretty good about it. If things continue to fall in place like they are now, the hope is that we'll continue to be in good shape, but a lot of it depends on the governor's new budget. The pipeline would be a great thing if we're able to get that in like we think.
That's why May is so important. We'll know both of those for sure by then. So right now we're just going off of what we.
Well, I've been asked here recently, we do have just teacher negotiations. The second half of the year, our classified staff has a 4-year contract. So we will be negotiating with teachers again, which I look forward to. Other things are going to go very favorable. So we have a bit of a bright forecast ahead. It's just things we have to work through to make sure we keep it there.
Good. All right, moving into work session, do you want to just keep going instead of take a usual break? It's only like 20 minutes.
Fine.
All right, let's move on to Mr. Baker.
Yes, we have Dave Baker with us tonight. I actually met him just last week. Our athletic department is going to be piloting all of their parent forms online, all the forms the parents have to complete. And the parents who are here and the teachers who are here and a couple that's been affiliated with the schools. At the beginning of the year, we have mountains of paperwork that parents need to fill out. So when I saw this and Mr. Baker was presenting just about athletics, I said, oh, stop. I want you to come and present to the board because we're going to pilot this in athletics, and if it works, we're going to use it for the entire district. Because we calculated we're using about 100,000 sheets of paper a year just to get in medical forms. And then we have to print all that, secretaries have to collect it all, the teachers have to collect it all, and then parents are rushed within a 4-day period to get all of this turned in. With the product Mr. Baker has, the positive thing about that is we can have it out there all summer long and say, fill it out at your leisure, but it's due by this date. We can run a report and see if it's there. No more copying, which is load off of our copiers. 100,000 copies a year is a load on our copy machines. Plus, it's less stuff for teachers to have to deal with. Just very efficient. I've never seen anything like this. So I wanted him to come tonight and present it a little bit to create some of an awareness. We are going to pilot this, like I said, beginning the winter sports in athletics. This is roughly $4 a student, and there's a $1 startup fee to start it out. It is kept in a database, and we've provided here for you it's HIPAA, all the HIPAA requirements, and that it is a secure database so that you're able to see that as well. So I just wanted to give not only you but the community a kind of an introduction to this evening, because I think this could be very beneficial for extremely busy families. And quite frankly, we're all connected, so it would be much more doable for everyone involved. So it's up to Mr. Baker to make sure this thing's delivered properly.
Final Forms is an online service that streamlines communication and data from the administration through the trainer, coach, parent, and student, and takes all that data that you're already collecting and puts it into the forms that you need to be able to have access to. As you can see on here, we've already taken the forms from Matt, so these are your actual forms that we've built into this system already. I've got some others up here to kind of give you an idea of how we personalize at Lakota, which is where my kids went to school. We have 16 forms that I had to fill out twice a year for each boy, for each sport, and it's a lot of paperwork. So now we do this, we online. From inside of there, this is what the administration then is able to see. They have access to the entire database, and there's a lot of things they can do inside of that, such as eligibility requirements. It automatically notifies parents 60, 30, 15, and 5 days away from their student's physical being expired. So it sends them an automatic email saying, hey, Johnny's physical is going to expire, you need to get that taken care of. If they haven't signed a form, it goes on a red, yellow, green system. So the red with the 2 heads means the parent still has form to sign. There's a little bell which makes it easy. You can click the bell and it automatically sends an email to the parent saying you have forms that require a signature. The next one is a student signature. So the student has to sign certain forms as well, such as the concussion and other student handbook forms. So you can ring the bell to update the student as well. From there, the countdown clock is a physical. Other things that can be done inside of this is we keep track of all of your teachers and coaches' certifications that they're required to have. So no longer are you keeping 3x5 cards or Excel spreadsheets of every certification they have, and it will send the coaches a notification when their certifications are about to expire as well. So they know at the click of a button that they have CPR class is coming up, that's coming due, so they need to find a class to go to, or that their background check needs to be done again, fingerprints. So you have that ability as well. Your trainers have access to this system so that they see it from a medical standpoint. They will see, at the click of a button who has asthma, diabetes, seizures, food or stinging insect allergies. They can sort it by condition. They can sort it by sport, by season. So they have access to it in those ways. They can create a new injury report. When they do so, the head coach gets a copy of the injury report on his phone so he knows that it happened. The parents get a notification that there was an injury that took place. They get a link to go and they can see what happened in the injury. So it's already got all that information in there as well. You can do all your back to school forms, which is kind of what we were talking about, and then you can take and create groups for like a fan bus for a 5th grade going to Kings Island on a trip. What's nice about that, once you create these groups, or even if you create the teams, so once you're in this mode, you have the ability at the click of a button to create e-cards so that you can have your whole, that's the basketball team. So now as a trainer, I'm sitting there with my phone or my tablet. I can have the basketball team pulled up. I know everybody on the team, and these are their emergency medical information with doctor's phone numbers, mom and dad's phone numbers, emergency contacts. If you're on a mobile device and you roll over one of those numbers, it will call it for you. You don't have to copy, remember any of those things. It's done. It tells you for the EMTs, the thing that they're looking for is they want to know who it was signed by and when, so how recently was it signed. So the system pulls over who signed the agreement, the emergency medical information, and the date they signed it on. So you have the ability at the very least to print these cards out, put them on a lanyard, because we're already carrying binders around as coaches with all the emergency medical information in it. You can have it on a lanyard, pull that one card off, hand it to the EMT, and it's ready to go. So it's got all their information as well.
And that feature alone will really help us with that policy we instituted last year. So if they're out of the game, the coach could actually just pull this up on his or her phone, be able to work it out, and kids could go who they need to go with. There's none other question about all the information.
A couple other things that it's going to do to help with the athletics to begin with is Matt will have the ability to do his OHSA eligibility forms that are specific. They have a certain format they have to follow. So he'll no longer have to go and find each child's birth date, and the first day they entered school, it will do it for him. The other thing that I'm sure you at least have heard of is the new OHSAA divisional placement report, or the competitive balance. We are working with them and have done their formula so that it will automatically calculate your divisional placement reports. And even though Springboro is always going to be a D1, they're still going to have to take the time to do this report. And what goes into this is they have to know where the child lives, what 7th grade they went to, what 8th grade they went to, and then it has to know whether it's a continuation or whether it's outside the district, and then points are added to it and factors that increase that number. So if you were a bubble, like an Anderson, where you're sometimes 1 or 2 students away from being a Division I, this could put you over the top. OHSAA is mandating that next year, so this piece is already done as well. So it does a lot of things, but instead, it would take me a while to go through and show you. So I want to give you a few minutes to ask me any questions that you might have. I can't actually keep track and take care of your parents for you, but I can keep track of their information. So you have access to the student, their parents, their information as well.
Nice product. Thank you, Mr. Baker.
Thank you.
Athletics, the parents do it once for all sports.
Yeah, the greatest thing about this is it stores your information from season to season and year to year. So if I have multiple children, it takes all my common information and preloads it to the next child. As a state requirement, it's kept for a minimum of 7 years, and I hear from the OHSA that that's going to go to 10 because of all the concussion. We actually save this data on our servers until you tell us to get rid of whatever year. So if 15 years from now you say get rid of the class of 2001, that's the group we'll get rid of. The last tournament game I think is in June this year. As soon as it's done, we wipe all the signatures clean. So the parents at the very least have to go back in and acknowledge that the information stayed the same or updated. But yeah, the greatest part is they will never fill out the same form twice.
In the database, will Springboro's athletes' data be commingled with athletes from other schools, or is it
No.
entirely
It's entirely yours. Correct.
And then about the data protection, obviously, we've we're not disclosing it, but some parents, I think, may be reluctant to do the online registering, for fear that their data might be subject to disclosure. Is there a disclaimer or something that's?
Yeah, they have access to the information on your website as well as ours. But we have our security certificates. We have, our servers are done through Amazon, which is probably one of the most secure systems out there. And that's what I have in front of you is we're actually HIPAA compliant where schools aren't required to be. We don't keep any student test data, things like that, so we're not FERPA compliant. If down the road when superintendents and coaches ask us to add different things, like next year you'll have the ability for coaches to do inventory inside this system to keep track of the equipment they're handing out and what condition it comes back in. So if down the road we decide that we want to start bringing in student education data because we've been asked to, then we will become FERPA compliant as well.
Yeah, I guess specifically what I was worried about is that is there a disclaimer that assures parents that the information isn't going to be shared with anybody, that it's only for, official use for the designated purpose, or, whatever the right words would be.
If you want to have some sort of disclaimer put on there, we can, but it's no different than the paper you're handing out now. Because that's what it is. It's your forms that you're already currently handing out. Everybody in the same building that has access to this has access to those pieces of paper. Yeah, you can add a disclaimer.
I'm just thinking, being electronic, some people might be reluctant.
Well, then some people may not do it, because they may want to do hard copies so that their information is online, and we'll have to accommodate that somehow.
Correct. Right, I'm just thinking if we can reassure them that we're not sharing that information or anything, maybe they'll be less inclined to
Right.
So, Mr. Baker, if we have a football coach, or not pick on football, any type of coach,
Yes, ma'am.
whether that be a volunteer that has to do their PAD or anyone like that,
Yes, ma'am.
will that notice, if they are not up to date, go to the athletic department?
The athletic department and whoever monitors the coaches' certificates, yes, they'll be able to see that anytime they want. Coaches can see their own, and coaches can only see their roster. They can't see the entire database. They can only see their specific sport.
I had asked Mr. Pennell if you had been in these meetings because
Yeah.
I have not, having been out, but this is amazing.
Yeah.
Because the amount of time that we just in HR are taking to try to be communicating with the athletic department and then looking up each individual PAV in which part, because there are several parts to it.
Yes, ma'am.
3 or 4. And then the fingerprint, it's amazing. So
Well, when I
to
saw
have
it,
that automatic, it's.
I called Mindy at the meeting. I think Matt thought he had done something wrong. Yeah. And I said, hold on, I gotta get Mindy in here to see this. Because you can actually send notices to remind them to get it done. Then it'll show how many times you've told them to do it.
Wow.
It just documents everything for you.
One of the neat pieces that I didn't show you, but as a coach, you actually have the ability to ring a bell for a child missing a practice. And it will keep track of how many they've missed, and it sends an email to mom and dad saying they missed practice today. It can either be excused or unexcused. They may know, they may not know. But now
Should've known we'd get it right in academics, or in sports, before we get it in academics. Isn't that amazing how that works? Very nice product.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
How many schools are you working with?
Right now in the state of Ohio, we're working with about 44.
Yeah, we're trying to lock him into a contract so he doesn't raise the price.
In the GWAC, you've got Centerville. Northmont is getting ready to do it, K through 12. Beaver Creek is going to be doing it. Trying to think of who else you've got. I think that's it in that group right now. But you have Mason, Lakota, Hamilton. You've got all 3 Olentangies up in Columbus. You got St. Ed, St. Iggs. Moeller's going to be joining us. So I just joined them at the end of last year. And they started up in Cleveland. The guy that designed this actually is a cross-country coach for Chagrin Falls and owns a web design company. And that's kind of how it started 4 years ago.
When he's no longer a track coach.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch with you.
9.3, update on final financing for the energy conservation.
Yep, we have David Conley here from Rock Mill Financial. And he's going to start out with giving us a final pricing structure for our COPS energy conservation issue. And then after that, he's going to briefly go into our refunding opportunity that we had talked about last time.
Good evening. Pass around these very short presentations and go through the update on the various financing transactions that we have. I do not have a projected presentation today. In here, you all may recall the last meeting when I attended the board session, we were talking about the financing structure for the energy conservation project, and at that particular meeting I told you I would return, you adopted a resolution authorizing the financing for the energy conservation project. I said that prior to actually doing the financing, I would return, give you an update on the rating process and also an update on interest rates before we actually moved into the marketplace and sell securities. So that's what I'm here for, here to give you an update. So in the presentation, what I have first is just a reminder of on page 2 of our team and the things that we do for our clients. And on that list of items, you'll see information regarding our help looking at refinancing opportunities, which I'll also talk to you about this evening. But let's move to page 4. On page, I'm sorry, page 3. How about I put my glasses on?
You want to put your microphone on, it might be easier to...
Are you going to hear me okay, or is it just this is for the audio?
For TV won't be able to hear you.
I see.
TV.
All right, I'll
Prime time TV, man.
So on the third page.
Is there a little button that turns green on your microphone deal? Third picture.
Yeah, it's green. I see it there. All right, I see it. You're good.
There's just no clip for you.
That's all right. No problem. And so in terms of the energy conservation financing, so everything on that transaction is ready to go. The first part of that transaction is that the school district needed to meet with Moody's Investor Service in New York to reestablish its credit rating. And that's a very important part of the financing process, and that investors that will buy these securities need some independent assessment as to what the school district's credit quality is, or has the school district's credit quality changed over time. And that one particular aspect of the financing tends to be the most expensive when it comes to the interest rate cost. So we've spent a great deal of time and effort into preparing for and making a presentation to the rating agency in New York City. Mr. Petrie and Ms. Floyd did a wonderful job. I do want to make sure that it's clear that they probably individually put in close to 24 hours of extra work to get prepared for and deliver the rating presentation. But this particular presentation is in front of analysts in New York City, and what they do, in fact, and did, was represent this school district and the community to these individuals in New York to make a case that the overall financial strength of the district is reliable and predictable. And I know tonight you'll hear about your 5-year forecast and how that has impact on things such as ratings. But in addition to that, they also talk about the management capabilities of the school district. And in that process, the rating agencies have to assess whether or not, on a forward-looking basis, that the management from a board perspective and from an administrative perspective will actually take care of and manage the fiscal health of the school district and that of the community, the taxes that are being paid to the school district. In the rating report itself, it cites very specifically the sound financial condition of the school district and the strong management demonstrated by both the board and the administration for reasons that you're rated in the AA category. So we secured a AA3 rating. Kudos to the team. Every rating meeting that we make is an attempt to gradually move the district's credit quality higher up the scale. So we did that. In this case, we're moving you along a particular path to the point where the district will eventually be rated even higher. And the outlook for the district from a future credit perspective is very strong. And that presentation was very well done and executed. With that in hand, we then finished the offering documents like a stock prospectus and sent that particular document to investors last week. So as it stands today, investors across the country are holding what's called a preliminary offering circular advertising the securities that will be sold tomorrow morning to finance the energy conservation projects. They're simply waiting on us to set the interest rates in the morning, and once we set the interest rates, we'll have a 2-hour order period where bids will be made from investors to buy your securities. And we're really optimistic because if you follow the markets today, it's a heck of a market for interest rates. Interest rates took a nosedive. I'm not sure if you heard about it. Stock market got creamed, but the bond market rallied, which is good for us because every 5 basis points that move down the list here, we save about $100,000 in interest costs. So as it stands, we're predicting an interest rate of about 3.75%. When we started with working on the energy work with John, and I think John is running around here, we were talking about 4.5%, and now we're down to 3.75. So the time that it has taken us to get everything together has worked out very well. So we're hopeful to have a very successful day, and probably by the end of the day tomorrow we can summarize what the savings from the transaction has been over the last several weeks. And I'll show you some interest rate changes. The other thing that's important about this, you all might remember some discussion about the guarantee on the payments for the financing. We were targeting $400,000 for the financing payments. Now we're down to about $360,000 per year. So that gives us even more breathing room, if you will, that the savings will in fact pay for the financing process. So it's a good position to be in. Any questions about the energy financing before I move to the next financing?
Yeah. Could you remind, I mean, this is a lease, pass over to a trust and lease back to a standard arrangement. That's correct. And can you review what kind of restrictions we have on the use of our facilities because we're not going to be the title holder anymore?
Right. Yeah. You have no restrictions on the use of your facility. The facilities, or all the educational facility the buildings that you have, the lease document does not restrict your lease, the use of your facilities. So if you decided to turn one into an apartment building, you theoretically could do that. The structure is designed for you simply to, if you've made an agreement to make an annual rent payment on the structure, regardless of the use of the structure. So you have the ability to change. You can go, if say for example you have a building that's currently a middle school, and somewhere down the road you'd like to make it a high school, or you'd like to make it partially an elementary, you can make those changes to those facilities, the uses of those facilities, as long as again the board continues to make the appropriations for the rent payment.
Okay. What about something like a problem arising in one of the buildings? What's our obligation if say, an environmental problem was to arise?
When you say an environmental problem, let's say a building, for example, was inadvertently constructed over a waste, a toxic waste facility.
How about if a roof leaks and we
so you have insurance responsibilities, obviously, that would allow you to to relocate that particular facility. But in the extreme case of something like that, then the leasehold, the only security that those folks that are lending you the money, the only security they have is the lease on the ground underneath that particular project. So if it in fact turns out that you can't use that ground anymore, and or that facility, then those investors stand to lose. You obviously as the board decide we're not appropriating to make a lease payment on a building that you can't use because underneath that particular building there's some type of toxin, then those investors are basically stuck with a building that they may not ever be able to lease. So that's part of the risk associated with from an investor's perspective. You, however, have the right to obviously find a building that is safe for the children to be in and move to another location to do so. So your commitment, these financings are unique. Your commitment is to lease a building and to make rental payments for 1-year intervals. And you can abandon that concept. You can say we are moving to another building and the investors accept that risk. They understand that you have the right to move into another facility. If you were locked into it, this particular instrument would be considered a debt instrument and would count against your debt limit. In this case, it is not considered a debt instrument. It's like leasing a copy.
And then one final question. There was some discussion about some buildings being removed from the lease. What was the final set of properties that were included?
The buildings that were included in the lease included, I believe the high school is a part of the lease, and this building.
I think they carved out the admin building.
Well, it's everything but the high school and this building. It's
Right.
the other buildings that are involved.
So that was one hurdle that I had, is that we carved out a couple buildings, but the value of the buildings is a lot, right? I mean, $100 million, something like that, across the entire district. And so we're collateralizing the $5 million that we're in effect borrowing with $100 million of property. So is that a fair way to look at this?
It really isn't a fair way to look at it. Because when you think of collateral, you think of, you buy an automobile and the car itself is a collateral for the loan, which if you don't pay, the bank repossesses. In this particular case, you have the legal right not to pay. So if you don't pay, you decide at the end of the year not to appropriate, the leaseholder can't come and take your building because they have entered into this agreement understanding that you have the legal right not to pay. So the collateral only works in a circumstance where you've appropriated the money for that 1 year period, but for some reason you decide, Tara decides, I'm not going to pay you even though we've appropriated the funds. And the circumstances around that would be somewhat peculiar.
So if after a year we decided not to do it anymore, right, what do we have to do then we basically pay the investors their balance, or how does that work?
So if you decide not to appropriate for that particular, so if you get to the end of a year, so again, in essence, you're voluntarily defaulting on a debt. So that's in essence what you're doing. So if you lease for a year and then you just say, well, we're not going to pay it anymore, and you still intend to use the building, you're voluntarily defaulting into a degree somewhat ceiling from investors. They have the right to lock the door, to padlock the door and say, well, wait a minute, we're not going to let you use the building unless you intend to pay us. If you don't intend to use the building, that's fine, but we then as investors have the right to rent it to someone else. So they can sublet it to another party if you decide not to pay the facility, pay for the facility, and move on to another facility.
So we don't really have a choice. Right. I mean, so it's not a 1 year option, and we can decide no dice anymore.
You have
this
the
is for
legal
20 years, right?
Right. You have the
we're
legal
in this.
So the practical matter that you're getting to is that you're borrowing $5 million for improvements, and the only reason you wouldn't pay would be because you're not using the facilities anymore. If you choose not to pay otherwise, then it's the equivalent of a default, of borrowing money and then not paying it back. So practically speaking, you're not, the Springboro community is not borrowing money that you don't intend to pay back. So when you boil it down to the practical aspect of what you're doing, it's no different than any other financing that you have. You have money that you borrow and that you intend to pay back.
Okay, if it's Dennis at 5 points, I guarantee we're going to use them.
Well,
Well, maybe it's 5 points teachers, though. We're going to make all them travel in there.
Outside of Jonathan Wright,
Right.
Or is the Educare building included in the ground lease? So, outside of Jonathan Wright, I'm not sure that
And so the only other thing I'll add to this is that because of the way Ohio law is structured, school districts do not have any debt capacity to do a project of this size without going to the voters to put a bond issue on the ballot. The only other choice that you have is this particular financing structure. So without this financing structure, the only way you could have done this is to put a voter bond issue on and have the voters vote for a $5 million voted bond issue to make these improvements.
to the House Bill 264, 65, whatever the right number is.
Right.
It's not an option.
It's not an option for some of the projects that you're doing. House Bill 264 is for projects that specifically save money from an energy perspective. So a parking lot, for example, or in some cases roofing and other types of improvements that aren't specifically energy conservation projects would be allowed. So you have to finance that using some other instrument. Things that are purely energy conservation, like lighting, and boilers to some degree, things of that nature can usually fit under a House Bill 264. And the other challenge that you have with a House Bill 264 project is that the state sets a maximum financing term of 15 years. So you're limited by what you can finance, and you have to pay it back within 15 years. So if the savings isn't quite enough, and you might need to finance it for 20 years, you're not allowed to do it with a House Bill. So the only other financing instrument, again, that you can use is a lease purchase financing instrument. So kind of by default, if you have a project that has parts of it that are not energy conservation, or let's just say they don't necessarily save enough to pay for themselves in 15 years, you either pay cash for those projects, put them with a voted bond issue, or don't do them at all. And if paying cash isn't a reasonable solution, putting a bond issue on the ballot isn't a reasonable solution, the only other reasonable solution is a certificate of participation, the type of structure that we're using with this. So, and you know, as your advisor, I mean, you pay me to advise you as to what is and isn't a good choice. I think in this particular case, given the nature of the project, the projected savings that we think the energy part will pay for, this is an appropriate structure. We also have it set up where if it turns out that the district does better financially in the next few years, we can pay it off early so that you're not stuck in this particular instrument. But it's a reasonable structure for the goals that you have. And you know, is it perfect? Absolutely not. But there's really no perfect solution.
It just strikes me the amount of the district capital that we're tying up to get the $5 million.
But that's okay. Again, it's all a matter of perspective. But yes, I understand your point. Are there any other questions?
So there is a payoff, early payoff.
There is an early payoff.
We know.
And again, just restating, so what we're talking about is our annual payments being approximately $360,000. But what we are believing and almost guaranteed is that we will have that much money in energy savings as a result of this project. Correct. So the net cost to the district is going to be zero.
Right. The savings were around $400,000, maybe even a little. I mean, potentially a little more than that. But sure. Conservatively, when we reviewed the estimates that were provided, and we went through this together, and we spent a lot of time. Yes. Exactly. Following the last board member meeting, we were very, very thorough in looking at all the estimates. So I think conservatively, the number of 400,000 is pretty reliable.
And we have a 20-year guarantee on that too through our contract. Well, David did a lot of work with coaching us to go through all this, so we appreciate that. We were very well prepared, and it was because of your leadership there.
It was fun.
Well, it was not fun,
but
you thought it was fun. You thought it was stressful.
I should also share with you that, because we're very mindful of spending money for anything. I mean, we advise our clients to be smart, find ways of doing things to save money. A $5 million transaction is kind of hard to warrant making a trip to New York on its own. So it turned out that we happened to be working with several other school districts, and we had 4 school districts together that agreed to share the expenses of a rating trip. So we actually were able to do a shared services concept and went to New York City with 4 school districts, 5 rating meetings, and then shared the cost of that among the groups, the cost to do as low as possible. It worked very well. To my knowledge, it's the first time it's ever been done in Ohio, so we're kind of excited about it. Speaking of saving money, page 4. And we wanted to just come back. I know that Tara mentioned to the board. Right. You currently have a bond issue outstanding that was done in 1996 for $32 million. That particular bond issue had an interest rate of 5.75%. I remember when that was done. Because we thought 5.75% was incredibly low, and we'd never see any rates lower than that. Well, 10 years later, rates had dropped to 4.75, and the school district refinanced those bonds at that point in time. And the savings on that refinancing was fairly substantial. The IRS has a rule that says that you're allowed to refinance a bond issue one time before its scheduled call date. So the 1996 bonds have a scheduled call date in December of 2016. So you used as a district your one advance refunding opportunity in 2006. The IRS has a rule. It says you can't use tax-exempt bonds to refinance a tax-exempt issue, but you can use a taxable bond issue. And throughout history, taxable interest rates have always been higher than tax-exempt interest rates until the last 2 to 3 years. In the last 2 to 3 years, taxable interest rates have actually dropped down below tax-exempt interest rates, and it's creating a unique opportunity for your district. Without having to violate the IRS rule, you have the option, if you would like, to refinance these bonds one more time before their actual call date in 2016. Where interest rates are right now, if you were to do it today, your savings would be in the neighborhood of $300,000 if you were to refinance. I am not recommending that you refinance the bonds yet. What I'm recommending that we do is watch the market. We had a great move today. I have to believe in the next month to 2 months that $300,000 should approach $400,000, maybe $500,000. When we get into that particular window, I'd like to be in a position to where we would recommend that you would refinance, move forward and refinance the 2006 bond. Let's take a look at the interest rates on the next page. For people that follow interest rates, I do, interest rates have a tendency to react to news in the market. And bad news makes interest rates go down, and good news makes interest rates go up. And for the past year, you can see the pattern of interest rates. There have been 2 types of news in the market the last couple of months. There's been good economic news and then bad international world calamity news, where you have first Russia, the Ukraine, then you have the issues with ISIS, then you have Ebola. And all of these things are making people across the world very nervous about everything. When investors get nervous about their money, the first thing they do is buy treasuries, U.S. treasuries. And that solid line that you see bouncing around, that's tracking interest rates for treasuries. Treasuries are a taxable instrument. The solid gold line are the interest rates for tax-exempt treasuries. So you can see the taxable rates are lower than tax-exempt rates. But if you believe, like I do, that there's probably still going to be more bad news in the next 60 to 90 days than there will be good news, I have a feeling that interest rates, now I'm not hoping for bad news, maybe I'm hoping, but
Charles disease loans will tear it.
I have to believe that from a trend perspective, you'll be in a position in the next 30 to 90 days to actually proceed with a refinancing and save about $500,000. Now here's the important part about the savings. It's not savings to your general fund. This is savings in taxes that the taxpayers are paying on those voted bonds. Those are voted bonds where property taxes are being collected. So we would reduce the tax rate to offset the savings that's accomplished by doing this. We're currently at a number that, if you said, David, just do it now, you could do it now. But again, I'm not a big crystal ball kind of person, but I have a feeling that 30 to 60 days we'll see some better numbers coming out of the marketplace. And if so, then we would be in a good position to take advantage of it. I know there were some questions last time about how you actually execute this. The savings that whenever I report the savings to you. It's always after all of the expenses to do it. So there are expenses to do this, namely because the bonds aren't callable until 2016. You would have to borrow enough money to make the payments on the old bonds until 2016. So that's a cost to the transaction. But even after doing that, you still save $300,000 to $500,000, and it's not a bad idea to consider. So what I'd like for you to do is to think about adopting a resolution at your next board meeting that would at least put it, set the opportunity to proceed with the refinancing if the savings actually hit a number that we think is an attractive number to proceed. Oh. Okay, so the next steps on page 6. The reason that believe it or not, you've already done the majority of the work to execute a refinancing. You already have your team of people that handle the school district's financing in your employ. The only two things we don't have would be the authorizing resolution to do the refinancing bonds. We would need an official statement, which quite honestly, the same official statement that we're doing for the energy project tomorrow, with some slight alterations, would be able to be used for this particular project. And we already have the bond rating in hand and paid for. The underwriters that would sell the securities are already hired. The only thing left would be to actually do the refunding issue. So the steps are really narrow. We can get in the market quickly once the resolution is adopted, and we've established some targets for savings. To say, you could say, for example, David, if we hit 400,000, don't wait, get it done. Or if you hit 500,000, don't wait, get it done. So that we leave that up to you. I think any number really beyond where we are now is not a bad number. I just have a feeling we're going to see some extra breaks in our favor in the next 30 to 60 days or so to jump in. If we see things moving away, maybe we settle on 300 as the magic number. But I'm not sure we're quite at the way yet. So our recommendation is that at the next meeting we adopt legislation to proceed with the refunder, provide Tara with some guidance on a targeted savings amount, and then we'll just set about creating a window of opportunity and take advantage when we can. Any questions about the refinancing?
Yeah.
Okay, that's all right.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the presentation, and I appreciate you bringing us the opportunity to potentially save some money. And I'm sure that somebody who's watching interest rates on a daily basis has a feel for where things are going. And so, I just want to understand how this works. The bonds would be paid off. We would borrow enough money to pay off the bonds. And so those are no longer there. But the tax issue is still out there. So there's no change to the taxing structure that's already been voted and approved. And so this new borrowing that we do to pay off the bonds, I guess, is working within that existing taxing structure. But you said
that's correct.
It'll be a situation where we won't need as much money from the taxpayers in order to meet the obligation. So given that the taxpayers had voted a particular, probably a fixed dollar amount levy, $36 million, and they're being taxed for that $36 million. How does that difference? How does that difference get accounted for?
Yeah, the way a voted bond issue works, and a lot of people really don't know this, is the ballot says that there's a dollar amount for the bond issue. As let's say the dollar amount is $36 million. So what voters approve when they vote for a bond issue is a maximum dollar amount for the bond issue. The next thing they approve is the maximum term of the bond issue. So let's say it's 30 years. And then the actual purpose of the bond issue, so how the proceeds of the financing would be used. So those are the three primary things that they're voting for. But on the ballot is also an estimated tax rate that says 4 mils for 30 years. The millage that's on the ballot is actually not something the voters are approving. The millage is only there as an estimate, to give them some idea of what the tax rate might be if they had a bond issue passed. The actual millage is calculated based on the annual payment of the bond. So when the bond is actually sold, there's a payment that's determined for that 30-year period, and then every year that payment is calculated, converted into a tax rate, to a millage rate. And then depending on the size of the tax base, you know, the millage rate goes up, goes down, stays the same. So right now you have payments every year of X, and you're collecting taxes based on X. After you do the refinancing, the payments on the bond issue associated with X go away, and they get replaced with a new payment on the bond issue Y, which is lower than the payments that were on X. So instead of collecting 4 mils, you collect 3.75 mils.
So that saves the taxpayer money then?
That's correct.
And when we do the
And
tax
so-
budget each year when we do the tax budget, I have to put in how much our net payments are going to be, which establishes how much they will collect. So when we get the new amounts, that's how much we'll be giving to the county that we are collecting on that particular issue. So then they'll be able to give the appropriate tax rate.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's not as easy as your house refinancing, but you can get there. But that's generally how it works. You know, there have only been a handful of districts that have been able to do this type of a refinancing. You have to have a few things in your favor in order to use a taxable bond issue. The first is that taxes and interest rates have to be low enough. The second is that you have to be close enough to your call date to actually pull this off. Because the further away you are, the more expensive it is to make the payments to the call date. So, and we get asked the question all the time, what if we do this and interest rates get even lower in the future? The new bond issue, just like the energy bond issue, will also be refinanceable in the future. So if it turns out that Ebola gets really out of control and interest rates drop 2%, I'd say that partially joking.
Well, we're hoping it doesn't get anywhere near us.
But
But we're not going to have time to vote on
you
this.
listen to enough news, and before long, you start to really get nervous about that. But if rates, for whatever reason, do continue to decline, you can refinance the new transaction in the future. We build those structures in for you.
Thank you.
Well, any other questions? And I'll let you get on to the. Okay, Dave. Appreciate it. I brought this for you.
We'll take a 5-minute break. All right, I think we'll get started again, and at this point, we'll turn it over to Tara.
We have Ernest Crawford from PFR. He's going to give us a presentation on the 5-year forecast, and then we're going to have some discussion. He's got my thing, that's why it's very loud. I wanted to know, it's okay. So he's going to give us a presentation. Are you ready up there, or do you need me to help?
I think John's getting the screen. He has my presentation, so got my laser pointer and the whole bit. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here and for the work. We appreciate it. Thank you this summer as well. It seems hard to believe, but it wasn't all that long ago, but it goes by so quickly that we got to meet for a few minutes to go over school finance, and each of you were able to spend some time. So hopefully that's helpful as well and lends itself. I wanted to start tonight by revisiting where we were in May, some of the things that we've learned since May, and the changes that for you to consider as you go forward and look at preparing an update to the forecast, approving an update to the forecast, and your plan as you go forward. We've had an opportunity in the last few weeks, actually, to start providing some key folks in the legislature with and at OBM with some data about the school funding formula. So the good news is the school funding formula, or model as they like to call it, that has worked for you. And we've talked about the reason that it's working with respect to your enrollment. It's kind of almost like a boomerang where you've had that enrollment growth and nothing was working, and now you're here today with the evaluation, a combination of evaluation and student that you have. So in that process, we've learned that they're encouraged by the fact that the formula is working. There's about 185 districts, though, that it's not working for. So we can provide some additional insight on that, and I think some additional confidence as we go forward. But still a lot in motion there on state funding. And as difficult as it's been, we didn't want to leave you with, in May, we still didn't have an estimate of the public utility personal property valuation. And so we wanted to try to take a swing at that and see if we couldn't get something in there for you to react to. And nothing's engraved in stone. I mean, those valuations will be known in a few weeks, and if it changes, this board has an opportunity to review the forecast again and approve an additional forecast. So it's a work in progress always, and we're never 100%. We're looking for trends and how closely we can be in terms of showing you that going forward. John, let me see that. I can't blame you for this because I brought the clicker. There we go. This is definitely a wide screen, a little bit difficult maybe to see, but we have 3 scenarios tonight. The base level scenario is the May forecast, but just as I talked about, we've updated it for public utility gas line changes and also increased the cap for state funding. And there's also some small changes for what's happened now that we started the school year. So we have the 15 pieces that are in the expenditures that have happened since May. Scenario 2 includes all of scenario 1, plus it deals with what if you model so that you can see the road, if you will, if you model your current negotiated agreement at steps, and then what would happen if you modeled steps plus some trend increase in base. These are not to say you're going to do these things. It's an opportunity for you to see the potential impact of these kinds of decisions. And at the end of the day, it's not to say that you'll settle for any of these negotiations or a process that you hold with them. At the same time, the board's business needs to be very transparent and here in public, and so you do need to see the results of possibilities here. So this is just an attempt to provide you with some of those scenarios. This was the forecast approved in May, just to keep our bearings and to see where we were and what has changed since then. So we can reference this as we need to, and of course you know that we have all of the detail to go with this that I probably to some degree have certainly overwhelmed with in terms of at least electronic paper that you've received. Just to remind you, and we provided this at the end of 2014, which just ended June 30th, that the forecast was a little bit more optimistic than you came in at. And so actually 2014 ended about $287,000 less than we had projected for the year. 2 primary reasons for that. One is that as we were headed down the road, I really had a responsibility, I think, to see this sooner, but I didn't. You were posting your open enrollment tuition costs in a way that I hadn't seen posted in a long time, which was instead of posting it as an expense, it was being posted as negative revenue. We used to be done that way 20 years ago. I haven't run into it for a long time. And so the revenue change in the top half had to do with this open enrollment being posted as negative revenue. The expenses were very much in line within 0.2%. So overall, we ended up a little bit worse off, but still very close, and I hope you'll agree with that, very close in terms of a reasonableness, if you will, of how 14. It's important to have these numbers because they serve as the basis for 15 and going forward as you try to trend and see a forecast. Not so much a budget for each year, but just the trends as you're going forward and as you make decisions as a board. The revenue piece that needs to be considered by you compared to where we were in May. Public utility. We have increased the valuation $18 million. Now, how did we get there? And maybe you've heard something different in the newspaper. It's very hard to get this information until it's done. You might read in the newspaper one thing, but it may not relate to what's actually happening. These filings are held by the Ohio Department of Taxation. They will be released by the end of the year, certainly, and we're hoping within the next few weeks. I think, Terry, you called the county auditor and he said probably about 2 weeks.
I talked to Nick Nelson, and he's hoping that they'll hear something by the end of this week possibly.
Right.
But he said he's not even sure. November 30th is when the numbers come out for sure.
Right. And so it's not that the county auditor's not, he doesn't have them. I mean, nobody really has them until Ohio Department of Taxation releases them. So we used $18 million, and I'll show you a valuation table here in a minute that kind of compares where you were before. It's just a little bit over half of the project that happened just a few years ago. At $18 million in valuation, it will generate about $900,000 annually. And as we mentioned, that also will have some impact on state funding, but you're still going to be a net gain from these two together. Because as you add valuation, you get wealthier per pupil. As you get wealthier per pupil, then you won't qualify for quite as much state funding. The other thing that we've done, and we'll explain a little bit more in detail as well, is that we've increased the caps. That's primarily as a result of conversation that we've been able to have recently with legislators, and we'll continue to update you on that. There is no one who could answer that today in terms of this is exactly what it's going to be. So the budget will be released in March. We'll continue to get indicators between now and then in terms of what people speculate. But until we see the governor's budget in March, you really won't know what's out there. And as you well know, after years of doing this, that budget may or may not be what happens. But we feel more comfortable raising these now than we did in May. And hopefully they'll raise some more, because the state still has not fully funded what they said that they owe you, okay? It does add to the revenue, as you can see there in that paragraph before. It added about $1.4 million in annual revenue by 19. This is impossible for everybody to see in the room. I apologize for that. It looked great on my screen, so you know, I'm not quite sure what happened here, but you would think that as it gets bigger, it's going to get better, but it didn't in this case. The chart on the left, the bar chart, this is 2014's values will start impacting. This is your public utility. This is the gas line. Those values going up from 72 million to 90 million will impact next year's collections. And so that is what's happening here with the valuation piece. The tax rate's the even smaller line there to see around 51 mils. Remember that on this type of valuation, it's a full voted. It's not effective. So it's the full voted tax rate, and you'll see as you go forward the increase in that revenue as a result of that. I wanted, and at least the board members can see this in their printout, I hope, I wanted you to be able to see the history of the public utility personal property valuations and this project back in 2010-11 range when that came on versus what we have now. Again, we'll have actual values maybe as soon as this week. It doesn't mean that the company won't contest the values. You see, that's part of the process that goes on here, is that they're not going to come out and start telling you easily, and we've run into this in multiple places, here's what it's worth, because they're sort of waiting until they see what comes out, and then there's a whole appeals process that could potentially happen here in terms of what they ultimately pay. I think you've got a great placeholder here. You know, if you were counting on this revenue tomorrow to make a decision, it would be a different matter, but you're really not, at least not in terms of how I view it. And so I think you're really very much in the driver's seat to monitor this over the next couple of months. The company will either come out and say, well, we're kind of okay with the values, or we're not, and that will give us another clue. Because if for example, they come out at 25 million and the company says there's no way that's too high, then we'll know that we probably want to stay in this range. Uh-oh. John, you may have to do the manual part here. Sorry about that. I put new batteries in it. Okay, this is an update of the slide that I gave you in May, and it recognizes that this public utility personal property valuation is coming into play, and you can see in column B that your per pupil valuation is increasing. The other thing that comes into play here, and I know I just read an article on Butler County and property values, but the data points to Springboro being different. Now, we're going to have to wait and see, but we're actually starting to see more inflation in your area of the county, if you will. And so we'll see what happens with that as we go on the road. But we have put in 5% increase in your residential values for the reappraisal. So that all blends into here, as well as number of students that you have, and of course that public utility personal property valuation. Even with that increase in valuation, you're still staying within a fairly tight range in column C of the state median, because just as you're moving, the state is moving as well. And Mike Sobel in our shop has made the state estimates. This is where we see you relative to the state median. And then finally, you can see in column D, the median taxpayer. That does not come into play here, the median taxpayer income, like it would in some districts, because quite frankly, it's only used to help you. So it's only when your median taxpayer income is below the state that they use it to help you in this formula. Bottom line is this: we see you in column H staying very much in that 39%, 38% range of whatever the state is providing in funding. Now, if you look in column G, you'll also see that we're increasing that state funding each year to have some placeholder in there that we believe that the state will increase the per pupil amount. We see that your per pupil funding will hold pretty closely to where it's at now through the forecast period, but that's a good thing. There's districts who are losing per pupil funding. Yours will, we believe, stay very stable. Next slide. The next piece is what we call our vulnerability study, and what it's really telling us in column O is, once again, that the state does owe you more money than they're paying you, even with the caps that we're modeling now. And you can see that currently in column R, the cap is 110% or 10.5% allowed growth. Next year we have that at 4%, the year after that at 5%. And then you can see that we've tapered that off a little bit in the next biennial budget. Even if you look at the current of where we are now, the state started out at 6.25% last fiscal year, 10.5% this fiscal year, and we'll learn more as we go forward. Again, each 1% would add about $140,000 to your revenue. So again, if you were needing this today to make a decision, if you were faced with making a decision with respect to whether you could afford to do something or not, then we would definitely try to look at this more closely. But these are the numbers that we believe in right now with the information that we have from the legislature. We do know this because of the 185 districts that are on the guarantee. This could also help you though too. There's an interest in the types of districts that aren't being helped by this formula are small rural districts with high transportation costs. Well, you have some of those elements. You're not small, and it's not that you're rural, but you definitely have the transportation costs. So we could see even some additional help here if they would target that transportation funding. And we've provided them some data on that that shows that those are the districts being harmed the most by, I shouldn't say harmed, they're being helped the least by the new formula. So the very thing that could potentially help those districts could even add more to your funded formula. So that would be a good thing as you look at this down the road. I would put that in the plus column to consider in the discussions. One of the things that probably won't help you that much, that's fine, John, stay right there. One of the things that probably won't help you as much would be if they target a lot of additional dollars to economic disadvantagement. Now, what we've shown them in the data is that's not going to help them with their guarantee problem. So whether with the big cities, that's where they'll tend to put money, but it really won't help with those districts that they're trying to get off, that I think that they're going to want to try to get off the guarantee. Here's what happened on the expenditure side since May as you look at scenario 1 results here in a minute. Again, these were all pretty doggone modest in terms of overall effect. You made a change in the first item in moving, you outsourced your technology services, and so that's reflected in here. We have put in here, Tara, the estimates for the savings from the energy savings project, and then also the opposite of that is we put in the debt payment that's needed as well. And then we did have some additional aids, Mr. Petrie, I believe, that were needed this year. And then we have some salary savings built in here for retirement replacements. And then finally, what was ultimately put into place with respect to 2015 salaries, which was the steps, the degree advances. And by the way, we did go back in and recalculate those steps where you are today. And 3.74% is where those are. That's what's going to happen when you have a lot of new staff, in which with your retirement incentive, you've got a lot of new staff that's moving on the index again. So we did actually go through that and calculate where people are at and what's happening there.
Ernie, if I could add, the salary schedule, I know when I met with the principals the other day, they were somewhat confused on that. The salary schedule, the SEP schedule, it's all one and the same. I did print, if you want to take one and pass it down, the law on these. The law states that we are required, coach annually adopt teacher salary schedule with provision for increments based upon training and years of service. And ours are certainly higher than what the state requires, but I think there's a lot of confusion on if we have to have the salary schedule or not. So a lot of times they'll hear, well, in some districts they don't have the salary schedule. The way to look at it is the steps are the teachers to give up. They're not ours to take. And I think that's where there's a lot of confusion on steps when that discussion takes place. So what I have for the board here is our contract language on those and also the law that supports that we have to have those. We'll pass that around.
Okay, so with these two slides, we've shown you what has been changed with respect to revenue and expenditure assumptions going into our scenario 2. So if you would go ahead and give us the next slide. I'm sorry, scenario 1. So all of that this is, scenario 1 is taking the May forecast information. Certainly we had to add 2019 for your 5th year, and those 2 pages that identify the changes are what is driving the difference from May to today. Really, it's 3. It's how you ended last year, the revenue assumption changes for state and PUP, and then also the expenditure assumptions that were made. This is basically carrying forward with no increase for negotiated agreement, the current step levels, if you will, that Mr. Petrie just referred to. And so when we were working with the administrative team, this is what came out in terms of, okay, why don't we present the board with the information? I don't even want to call it options, it's a scenario, but it's for you to consider in terms of trying to get a picture of this district's financial roadmap, and that's what you're doing. So if you look at scenario 2 on the next slide, John, sorry. A little bit hard for you guys to read, sorry about that, and I know you're on the edge of your seats to see that, but this gives you the parameters that are being modeled for scenario 2, which shows basically in the blue lines the step increases for the certified and classified staff. Next slide. This gives you the results of that. And so at this point in time, when you look at the difference from scenario 1, which was just updated for consistency, the revenue and expenses, this is showing you the results of maintaining those steps of 3.74% per year for the years 2016 through 2019. And that's the certified level, by the way, that's not the classified level. No other increase in compensation, and this is the result of that modeling. Next slide, please. I also just wanted to insert here, and I think this is probably additional information from what you had last Friday during the Finance Committee, but at least here's the actual parameters that you can see them. And scenario 3 has in blue not only the steps, but it also has a 2% for a model trend. It's not negotiations, it's a model trend. And so then you can see the result of that. And my takeaway from that is that, of course, it's going to reflect increased costs, more difficulty in terms of meeting those costs as you go forward. The good news about where you're at, no matter which of these scenarios that you decide to go with in terms of a forecast in your planning document, the good news is that you are in a stable position right now. You have some things in the plus column, I believe, on the revenue side, but we have some challenges as well on the expenditure side. Continue to see those increased costs on purchase services. We're going to have to monitor that really closely this year with special needs costs. That was the area that really took off on you last year from even October to May. And so we'll definitely keep our eye on that as we go forward. In summary, scenario one is more representative of an annual budget, if you will. In other words, it puts 2015 in place, and it does certainly have some trends in there for utilities and purchase services, but overall, it doesn't reflect the biggest part of your expense, which is in salaries. Scenario two has those steps and degree advances in place, and then scenario three has not only 1 and 2, but also has a trend increase in there as well. I think that you're well positioned. It's really nice to, when a board has the opportunity to get the information and the feedback, and I don't know if you guys are going to report on as well. I'm not even sure who's on finance committee here from this group, but the process that you went through there. So my understanding is that you'll be voting on this or some scenario.
We're going to talk about that in a minute.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry then. I don't want to be presumptuous. But anyway, we have the information out there for you to consider. Be glad to certainly answer any questions that I can and research those I can.
Well, if we could, if you could back up, John, to the different slides. Basically, Tara and I have to come to you with what we would like to propose. Of course, this is the first scenario that shows a massive cash balance of $8.2 million, which I think any business, if you don't give raises and salary increases, any business is going to have a large cash balance. So on to the next slide, John. This is the one we would like to recommend.
We are looking at each other.
This is the one we'd like to recommend to the board next week, or I should say we will be. And the reason is with the 5-year forecast, we have to be cognizant of we're not negotiating with the 5-year forecast. What is included in this are the steps, and as you can see, in year 2019, we are showing a deficit at that point. What this one does is it allows us to really get a better idea of 3.74%, plus all of the plans that we have in place, our projections on the staff that we need to have. And what this is really saying to me is we're going to have to curtail some of our costs. All these underlying areas here are we're spending in a deficit, which is quite the huge deficit, quite frankly. So we are going to have to look at not cutting things, because I don't want people to leave here saying, oh, they're cutting staff tomorrow. The sky's not falling in Springboro. But what we do have to look at is all of the projections we have of perhaps more teachers in certain areas, another roof at another building, or things of that nature. We're really going to have to take that all into consideration as we look at our academic data and project out of what we're going to spend. The energy project that was approved tonight is going to be a huge help once that goes through. So even though we're showing a negative here today, I don't want everyone to run and say, oh my gosh, Springboro needs a levy. Levy is not a discussion we're having, because quite frankly, I don't think we're going to need one in 2019. We are in negotiations this year, but I do have to say this. The reason, and we're one of the few districts that hasn't run a levy since 2006, 2005.
November 2005.
So I mean, we're almost 10 years past that. We're projecting another 15 years. The reason we do have that large cash balance going in, and hardly a problem there, is for 5 years our teachers didn't take a salary increase. Which if you look from one slide to the other, it's about $8 million over a five-year period just for steps. So when we do talk about some of these large cash balances that we've had, there has been some good financial planning, but the thing that's really kept us afloat the most is the sacrifices the teachers made. Right now, we're looking at all these districts spiral out of control. All of them are having to rush to levies, and we're kind of standing alone as a district that's not, because in years past, we somewhat stayed steady, to where now if we continue to stay steady, we're going to be able to push this number way back with a negative. So our recommendation is going to be, since the steps are required by law, and those are what we negotiated, we will be pushing that recommendation forward to approve this 5-year forecast. The one after this, John, you'll move to that? The last scenario, I should say? Oh, that's it, I'm sorry. As you can tell, that is a $6.4 million deficit that we're running there. That's not a good situation at all. So once again, that is if we keep everything we have in place today, with a 2% plus steps, plus everything else that's in the contract. That is where we would end up at, which certainly is not a good situation at all. So that's something we're going to have to look at, and I'm confident that the people within the district will be able to work something out so that we're able to stay out of that situation. So once again, option number 2 is what we will be asking to recommend to you for approval at the next board meeting on October 21st. Terry, do you have anything to add to that?
We always cover everything.
You're training me well.
We've been in too many meetings, so that is going to be our recommendation, and obviously the input that you guys would have would be much appreciated. Your thoughts of how you feel about the forecast right now going forward.
It's something to think about over the next 5 years. We do have a renewal, the one we just passed last year, the year before last, it seems like every year. The one that was just passed is up in 5 years, which will be 2019. We can actually move that up if we want and have it approved earlier if necessary. That is a definite. With the state of the economy the way it is, I believe, from my position, we have to look at some of these future expenses that we put out there and curtail some of those so that we stay off of the ballot for new money. Regardless of what's happened here or there, the bottom line is with the economy that we're in, and it is recovering, I wouldn't say rebounding to some extent, as long as we're able to meet the needs of our kids academically. And this year alone, we have spent a lot of money on special ed, but we needed to. A lot of these things were well overdue. So when we talk about a Kids First budget at our next meeting, we are going to have specific data here to show we needed to make those expenses. Now, the special ed department feels we're in pretty good shape right now. Right now, where we're at, it's not so much we need to hire staff, is we need to build our instructional capacity in certain areas to address the new standards. 2 years ago, when Tammy and I first started, we talked about as we moved from 75% of our kids passing a test to individual learning, if we would have had those basic criteria applied that day, we would have probably been in bad shape. Needless to say, there were some gains made that we buffered that, but what we're finding out now, especially in the area of gifted, they're actually moving forward some of those benchmarks to where we're going to have to meet those this year. So we're going to really break down for you the integral parts of our data and to be able to show in the elementaries, for example, where resources were added, even though we may have a C or a D in gifted, we actually had an A in our elementary buildings. Some of the things we have found in secondary, the district really didn't even know. And it's things that we have found out here in the past 3 months that were just ways that your numbers are typed in terms of the kids that you have in the district. So the more knowledge we get on those things, the more things that we can change. But again, there's a large capacity of insight of how we're building things to be prepared for this individual testing environment instead of 75% of the kids pass 50% of the test. So with that said, once we have that data nailed down, then by May we're able to come back and really look at how much staff do we actually need. Right now at the high school, we have 100 kids less than we thought we would have this year, I think is what it ended up being, right? So that's a good thing. 100 kids at the high schools, a couple teachers, a few teachers. So we're planning on at 5 points, they'll have about 50 kids in class. I'm kidding, some of the teachers are time. But nonetheless, we're seeing in elementary, our numbers are staying very similar, so we shouldn't have any expense there. Special ed, we're looking better in. Gifted is still out. We're looking at what needs to be done as they develop those things. The high school is the unknown. Now, we had 6 teachers slated.
Actually, it was
4
4 teachers,
a guidance
administrator, and
counselor,
counselor.
Or in the 16 forecast.
Odds are we may not need that next year. So when you talk 6 staff members, that probably is the tune of about $350,000 to $375,000 per year. So that alone is a whopping expense. With our textbooks, the Common Core is bouncing all over the place. I'm a little reluctant. We had to have language arts and math in our world languages, but we're a little reluctant right now to go dive any deeper into some of those things because we don't know what's going to happen with the state curriculums, the way that it stands. So you're investing in a very unstable market to some extent. So we may be able to hold some of that back to get a better footing before we move forward in other areas because we are pretty solid in other areas. And as far as capital needs goes, I think the main nuts and bolts, of course, every air conditioner we had decided to break down 2 months after John was on the job, so most of those have been replaced with warranties. We have new roofs. We're getting a lot of new windows and lights and things of that nature off the energy grant, so it's going to be more being very selective. If the Borough Fest, which was approved tonight, comes through and is able to produce maybe $100,000 this year, and each year we get $50,000 more, by the time that turf needs replaced, that might pay for it. It's things like that that would make a tremendous difference in keeping us moving forward without having to talk about other alternatives to generate funding. So, in my opinion, from an operational standpoint, things are looking pretty good. It's nice to have a treasurer that knows this in and out. So, and of course, working with Ernie as well, it's been a big help. So I think we have a pretty good grip on it right now in terms of where we're at. Now, if the governor changes the budget, well, we hope that doesn't happen. I do too.
Questions or thoughts? Good.
Wow, we plan to go out for that. Thanks, sir. Thanks.
Thank you.
Where are we at?
9.6 was Andrea. Mrs. Cook.
Good evening, Board. I'm here to ask for your approval for us to take a look at a Spanish book called Tejidos. We divided our Spanish level for this year. I don't know what it means either, Dr. Juan. But it's a book that's really going to challenge our Spanish 4 honor students. Our Spanish 4 was split into 2 different levels this year. We have an honors level and we have a regular Spanish 4 level. That honors level course includes students who are reading a couple novels in Spanish. It is a full immersion class. It is to prepare our students for the level 5 and or 6 class. So that Spanish honors 4 will allow students to jump either to Spanish level 5 or 6 the following year. So these are our very serious students who are likely interested in a Spanish major or minor at the college level. The Tejidos Wayside Publishing book will allow them to study the 6 different themes that they will see on their AP College Board tests the following year. So basically we're laying a foundation for their AP level course whether they decide to go into 5 or 6. 5 is more of a language course, whereas the level 6 is a literature course. So students can jump from 4 to 6 or from 4 to 5, but the level 4 honors will lay the foundation for the AP level in either one or both of those courses. The Wayside Publishing Company is directly aligned with the College Board 6 theme items that they're expected to produce on their AP level tests the following year. We'd like to pilot that program.
Well, we need to know what Tejidos means.
I tried to look it up on the Spanish-English dictionary online, but I didn't get anywhere.
Because it sounds like a dessert.
They serve it at Taco Bell.
I think there's a backup.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe one of the kids will be able to come and tell us what that is after the class.
So we'd like to take a look at that over the course of this year.
This year?
Yes. They're also using a couple novels that are written entirely in Spanish, and they're also using some of the Vista product So this would be another resource that they would use in that upper level course.
And as we're finding, all of that plays into our gifted rating at the secondary level, and we had no idea. Now we do.
And we do have 40 children currently taking this course, the honors level.
So really, we're going to be pushed to offer more of those. Just to give you a short synopsis, any of the kids who are identified as gifted will be expected to score in the 80% of the gifted kids at the high school level, secondary level, will be expected to be rated gifted on any of the end of course exams, state exams, whatever. The ACTs, they will have to have at least a 30.
In their identified area.
And they're in identified areas. So that is big, huge for the secondary level. And that's something that we're definitely going to have to look at for our kids to be able to produce that level. We're going to have to be able to offer classes to prepare them for that. So it's totally different than elementary in terms of how this works. And that we're going to talk more about that next week. It's quite interesting, but very sophisticated the way the state's done it. Long overdue. They should have had it this way 20 years ago, in my opinion. It's not linked to a test. Now it's linked more to performance in classes, which I think is better for the kids. I really do.
Thank you. Mr. Pennell, 3.7.
Members of the board, for a discussion today, Sarah Benedict would like to offer the string class a chance to go to New York over spring break. It's strictly a voluntary trip. It's similar to what happens with the trips overseas and all, where the students contract directly with the company. Then if they get enough people, they go. And so the contract will be directly with them. The only thing that would be is for every 10 students, there's a free chaperone paid for, and that's, that your vote allows Ms. Benedict to use that if there's enough students to do that. So that's what we've got there.
And 9.8, Ms. Benson.
Yes, wanted to have a brief discussion. At 5 Points Elementary, we are looking at the next board meeting to approve for an educational assistant. We have had a student with some significant needs, need one-on-one aid support in the classroom due to some medical issues that have arisen already this year through being tested with some medical issues through a doctor. So we will be bringing that to the next board meeting, and that the posting will go up pretty soon because we are in need of that. So I just wanted to make you aware that we will be bringing that to the next meeting for that purpose.
And pardon my ignorance, but that's just something that occurred.
It's just something that occurred this year, as we had already staffed for the year. And that is going to happen periodically. Sometimes we, just for history's sake, sometimes when we get to an IEP and we find that some students on individual education plans no longer need one, then they are taken, they don't need that anymore. And so it is kind of it's a moving target, something that I will keep you aware of as we go along.
Sometimes we may have to discuss some of those in executive sessions to bring up to speed, because I do want to educate you more on the world of special ed. When we start the year, we could have 3 or 4 kids move in after the year starts that no one could possibly budget for. And it could get very expensive, but we've really had that happen this year. So I think, what if we hired 10 new aides possibly? So we've definitely, there certainly can't be anyone that says we haven't hired new staff to address our needs. We've hired 10 new aides, two or three new teachers, a new coordinator, and also a half-time school psychologist. So we've definitely had some investment in special ed, which it was needed. It really was.
Financially, that's a sizable investment.
It's about $30,000 per aide. Per teacher, you're looking at about 55, and the school psychologist could go higher than that. So yeah, it's an expensive area. And those were basically forced by IEP. Those just weren't things to improve our quality of education. So the quality is going to come with the instructional techniques that's being employed.
9.9, public participation. Anyone? 9.10, discussion and other business. Are we going to need executive session? All right, with that, 10.1, we'll move into executive session to consider the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Roll call?
Regano.
Yes.
Baloo.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Davies.
Yes.
Motion passes.